You're listening to Curiosity Invited with David Bryan here on LA Talk Radio.
Hello, my name is David Bryan, and this is Curiosity Invited, a podcast inspired by endless curiosity. Tune in for an open-minded conversation about interesting and important things. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Curiosity Invited. My name is David Bryan, and today I have the great pleasure of speaking with somebody I've known for, how many years?
14.
Since you were 14. And I'm not going to ask you how old you are, but you might tell me, but you've got to be close to 40. Oh, 41. Wow.
Yep.
Wow. We know each other a long time.
Yes, indeed.
How come you look the same and I don't?
I don't know how that works. I like to think I'm older, though.
Yeah. Wow, that's wild. So I met Sophia when she applied to the school that I was at the time trying to get off the ground, and did, and we've known each other. We've stayed in touch. We've known each other for years. Ultimately, Sophia graduated from Berkeley, came to work at the school, and has been there for, well, how many years?
17 years now.
17 years. Wow. And is both a teacher. I know for a while you were a curriculum coordinator or head of curriculum or something for the Spanish
Yeah, now I'm
department.
department chair.
Now you're department chair as of recent. Like, were you recently?
As of this year.
As of this year. That's great.
Technically I start next year.
You mean the year coming. Got it.
Yes.
Got it. Well, so we're going to have a really frank conversation because that's the only conversation. Those are the only conversations I've ever had with Sophia. And you know, I'll say to the audience, but I'm saying to you, Sophia, that I learned more. Well, you were the first person to actually open my eyes to the entire, open my eyes to how much I didn't understand about disability and ability, and the assumptions that people make, that I was making, that I make, based on sort of colloquial cultural misunderstanding, and not at any rate, so we're going to have a frank conversation, and if I ask you questions you don't want to answer, or if you go to a territory and I'm going to say, don't talk about that.
Okay.
But that's probably not going to happen, knowing you. So thank you for coming on to Curiosity Invited, and thanks for doing this, and thanks for being willing to have a conversation about, look, what's so, what I have mixed feelings about is, so I know you to be an incredibly competent human being, and I'm going to give a little bit of your bio. I'll put it in the description, but I'll give a little bit of your bio so that other people can get a sense. But here we are, we could talk about all sorts of things. You have points of view, you have knowledge, you have expertise in all sorts of things. And here we are again, people meaning me, want to talk to you and want you to be willing to talk about ability, disability, etc. So that's ironic, because you're way more than that, and yet somehow you are also that, and
I'm okay with. And I know that is what I've centered in on in a lot of my educational, even though I've been an educator for more than 20 years now, because I started my educational journey in college, as a teacher. I, going into it, knew that regardless of what subject I was teaching, the disability was going to be part of the teaching moments, because regardless of whether I'm teaching teacher preparation in college or Spanish, the disability is never away from
Mhm.
my frame of reference and from my students' frame of reference. Like, regardless of who I'm teaching, the fact that I am not your traditional teacher, because I can't be a traditional teacher. I can't be the teacher who or the professor who writes things on the board and just has them copy things that I write, because my writing sucks. Because I can't reach the board, because I can't. So I, in any context, the disability is going to take full focus. And because of that, I've been okay with always talking about how my disability affects my life,
Got it.
because it does.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember one time, there was and maybe it's still there. But there was a period where um, people were normally able, I don't even know how to use the words, right? Regular folks, people without an obvious disability,
Yeah.
were using language like differently abled. And
Oh
I
God.
remember one time you just said, you said to me, it was like, I don't know what they're talking about. I'm disabled. It's like, yeah, we're
Yeah.
differently able. That's true. But like, this is moving through the world the way I move through the world is a disability. So, so yeah,
um, I still cringe when people use words like handy capable, and like, I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to normalize it. They're trying to be, but and I still agree with this person first language, like person with a disability and things like that, because it shouldn't be the first thing somebody thinks about when they see me. But I also acknowledge that it is such a central focus of who I
mhm,
am that not acknowledging that is also a disservice.
mhm,
Um, um, so when people try to normalize it in a way where it kind of detracts from it, also drives me crazy,
right.
because it is important to, and that's me and my personal preference. That somebody else might say to you, "I love when people uh, don't use the word disabled," and maybe uses a more um positive, if you will, frame of reference, because for them that's what makes them comfortable. So it's all, here is where I always tell people when I'm doing trainings about disability awareness and disability and inclusive practice. I I always say, you have to take your cue from the person that you're talking to. You can't assume that somebody is gonna like the term uh, disabled person or person with a disability. It's really up to them.
Well, I get that. And, we're living at a time where so many things are so highly politicized. And so you may be comfortable with it, but I guarantee you that there will be people leaving comments that try to rake me over the coals because because I referred to you as someone with a disability, as because be, even though you're fine with it and in fact, you just said you prefer the acknowledgement of that. Um, and yet there's an intolerance that is
Oh, for sure.
linguistic, right? Right. I mean, that is, you use the wrong word. So we live at a really weird time.
And that's why my advice to anyone when they're dealing with sensitive language is really, it depends on the person you're talking to. So not being afraid to acknowledge, like, hey, so how would you like me to refer to you in context?
Right.
Like, and acknowledging that there is that language, that you're willing to talk to the person in the way that they are comfortable,
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
is the best way to do it.
Um, well, so lest anyone listening to this think that Sophia is only about that. Let me just tell you. So after high school, which she graduated from, she went off
Yeah.
to Berkeley, got a degree in political science with minors in Spanish and disability studies. She went on to earn a master's degree in secondary education and a doctoral degree in educational leadership for social justice, both from Loyola Marymount University. So you're speaking to somebody, or I'm speaking to somebody, or you're listening to somebody with substantial background and experience uh, in the world of education, um, and in the practice of teaching. So she is not just a theoretician. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. But actually has years and years of experience in the classroom, and even more years of experience in a wheelchair. So would you be comfortable talking about, well, like, like why are
Sure.
you in a wheelchair? What's
What's my deal?
what's the deal?
um um I was born, uh I was supposed to be born on Christmas Day, and I was born on October 8th, so I was born a few months premature. And when I was born, I was only 3 pounds. Um, and so I, because of the lack of oxygen during my birth, I was at 6 months old or so. Can't remember the exact time I should uh diagnosed with cerebral palsy. Because my parents started to notice that I was not developing my fine motor skills and things like that. So they went to various doctors, and
Mhm.
eventually I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. My father and my mother, my father being a professor, was very determined a very young age that my education and my mind was going to be what was going to be my way of proving to folks that I was not someone to be pitied. Um, so I thank both of my parents every single day for that
Mm.
drive, because that is really what has gotten me to the point of where I am today, and why I value education from the very outset.
Mhm.
And I was lucky enough to be able to do that because my cerebral palsy did not affect my in that way. So I was able to pursue education, and I'm lucky in that
Mhm.
context
Mhm.
for sure.
Um, and I know you went off to Berkeley after high school. Well, wait, I don't know if it makes any sense for you, but I remember that there was that you were at a public school before, somewhere in San Fernando Valley, and it was not a pleasant experience.
It was
And
definitely not a
and
pleasant
it,
experience.
it was almost like you were too much trouble.
The school that I was in for high school was really just not physically accessible. Um, so uh, the straw that broke the camel's back, for lack of a better phrase,
Well,
was I was physically injured
yes,
at the school, and I from that moment forward was not ever gonna step foot in the school again,
right,
and that is how we ended up in
yeah,
your school at the time.
yeah.
Um,
I mean,
and
when you said you were physically injured, it wasn't a hostile act by somebody attacking you. As I recall, it was an aid that you were given that didn't know
yeah,
what he was doing.
she didn't know what she was doing. She was helping me transfer, and I subsequently broke my femur.
Right, that's right.
And I was out of commission for 2 months.
Right,
And the first 2 months of neuro, I didn't even go to school because I was unable to sit
right,
in my chair.
right.
So so that is what I can now look back on and say the luckiest thing that ever happened to me, because it really forced me to change course and start valuing my education again, because I was really in a space where I didn't want anything to do with anyone, and I
Mhm.
was pretty depressed and
Yeah,
almost suicidal. Really, at that point, having people who didn't automatically judge me because I was in a chair gave me the freedom to really be a teenager, really just not feel like I was gonna get constantly bullied for being just me.
hmm
And
hmm
and so then that kind of gave me the confidence to start really thinking about what I wanted to do with myself and really wanted to pursue other things, and ultimately that's what led me to Berkeley.
and when did the idea come to you that the education was your future, not in terms of learning, but in terms of actually teaching, being in a classroom, all of that stuff. Career. When did that come?
Um, well, in Berkeley, I became very involved with the disability community, um, because Berkeley in the 1970s was the birthplace of the disability rights movement.
Yes.
So through that, I started to really become proud of my disability and proud of what of the struggles that had come before me, and I really became immersed in this idea of the disability is not a detraction of who I, who I am, but it's part of me, and I should be proud of it. So that was the moment where I discovered, for lack of a better word, this idea of disability being such a focal point in my life. And part of that was that my friends and I decided to teach a student run class once a week uh, for fellow students. It's a program that Berkeley had at that moment, and I believe still has, called Democratic Education at Cal. And uh, we develop curriculum for students to become um, personal care attendants for folks with disabilities. And so they, at the same time as they were helping individuals with disabilities and being paid for it, but they were also coming to our class once a week and we were telling them about the history of the disability rights movement. We were inviting speakers and the like, and that's when I really got bit by the teaching bug because I
Mhm.
started to realize like these classmates of mine had no idea of the rich history that Berkeley had in and of itself for the disability rights movement. And even though it was really great to see so many people with disabilities on Berkeley campus, and it had always been kind of a mecca for students with disabilities, I think giving people the opportunity to understand why that was was something that I was really proud.
But can we just switch tracks for a second?
Yeah,
Um, when you meet people for the
yeah,
first time, ev back then and now, well, you said it, right? I mean, your disability is in some ways not only from the choice of what you have engaged in and the business you started, et cetera, and the work that you've done in the disability rights movement, but but you're sitting in a chair
yeah.
and so it's there. And is it a source of frustration? I mean, or is it, I mean, obviously people react to it in different ways,
Yeah.
right? Um, and I mean, could you talk about that? Is that does it tend to be hard? Does it what do you feel like you have to do things to put people at ease? Or how does that work?
It is a sense. I don't know if I would call it frustration, but when I see people's demeanor change when I walk into a room, it's something um that I unfortunately had to deal with for so long that it kind of rolls off my back at this point, and
Mhm.
I automatically have to like start uh giving people my resume, for lack of a better word, so that they start understanding that they're not just talking to anybody, but that I have a right to be in the space and
Mhm.
have an opinion.
Mm,
Uh, and
interesting.
that does get kind of tiring at times, but I'm also, like I said, I'm also so used to it
Yeah.
that that it's just kind of become second nature, which
Well, it's amazing. It's interesting. What's interesting, what I remember vividly, when I recall vividly, is um, right from the start, I felt comfortable having frank conversations with you. I remember in the interview, I remember asking you the question, just when you're speaking, you're animated. You, like many people,
yeah,
speak with our hands for expression.
yep,
Our hands work differently. And it
yes.
is it the tone of your voice changes. Is this discomfort? Is it what and I mean, I think I think I grew up thinking, or maybe I was even taught that that was impolite, right? Or that was not what you do. You don't have an honest conversation, right? A frank conversation. But I felt somehow so at ease. Maybe it was your parents, maybe it was just, I think it was you. And you responded just really clearly about that. And and you had this incredible ability as a kid to make it really clear. You can have any conversation you want with me. You may not get the answers you want, but you're not gonna. It's not going to offend me that you ask me a question. And I was, that was amazing. And at the same time, it felt like, geez, I wish I had been the adult in that room rather than you.
And but honestly, that was one of the things that I most appreciated because I remember being very frank in that interview, saying, "I don't even want to be at your school. Like, why am I here?" But and then having that conversation that you recalled and saying, like, I'm really happy that we're having this conversation because so many people just don't ask those questions because, like you said, they don't feel like they're being polite. Um, and sometimes politeness doesn't get us anywhere. Like
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
if you're if you're concerned that I'm getting tired because my pitch is changing or something like that, then you're not giving me the chance to fully express. And I've learned from that conversation that I have to put myself out there more, and I have to tell people like my speech might be a little different than everyone else's,
Mhm,
but it doesn't mean that I'm tired. It doesn't. It just means that my vocal cords function a little differently
mhm,
because of my spasticity. Um, so I've learned in the professional space that I do have to make people at ease with what they're about to see,
mhm,
which
mhm.
is interesting, but it's something that I and some people might say, well, it's not your responsibility to do that. But if I don't do that, then I'm not going to be given the same opportunity.
Right, right.
So,
If you don't do that, and if they don't do that, right? I mean, there's a way in which, like, you should. I mean, I kind of agree with this thing. You shouldn't have to do that. On the other hand, you know, if you don't, if they don't ask, if there's not an opportunity for you to tell, they're going to walk away with certain assumptions based in
exactly.
ignorance, and
Exactly.
so all sorts of opportunities will be denied, right? I mean, or also,
Exactly.
and that can't be good, right? I mean, I remember I just had this flash as you were speaking of your parents coming to pick you up. Uh, it wasn't the first day, but I think it was the second or third day. It was the end of the week, and where's Sophia? Her folks are here to pick her up, and there you were with Lori Stevens sitting on your lap,
Yep.
racing down the walkway in your electric wheelchair, and just, it's just like, oh, this is the right place for this kid.
Yes, it was.
And then you gave me a
No, and
ride.
yeah, no, I, and that was those were some of the times where I realized, like, the fact that I was given the opportunity to be in such a juxtaposition of an educational experience, like from the really, really toxic to the really, really just open,
Mhm,
I think has made me stay in education because I want to be part of somebody's experience, just like you were and the folks who were back at New Roads back in the day were for me, where I wasn't some problem to deal with, but I was just another 14-year-old kid. Like
yeah.
it
You're
was
you were a 14-year-old kid with a go-kart.
I know exactly. Like I had some. some good to bring to the community, whether it
Yes.
was like being a taxi cab for Lori Stevens or like a joke for someone else. Like I think that was the moment where I was like, this is just so not something that I'm used to, because I was for so many years just this anomaly of a kid who was very smart, but nobody took seriously aside from my parents and my family,
Right.
because I was not what they were used to as a person in a chair.
Right.
A lot of folks don't have the time to spend hours on the internet, um, and find those resources and find those people, and the financial stuff is also an issue. The
Sure.
financial resources to find the attorneys and find the
Right.
things, and um, so I I count my blessings in that regard, that I was able to get myself out of a toxic situation, because who knows what my
Hmm.
life trajectory would be if I
Sure.
hadn't done that switch.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Um,
And then so, I mean, I almost don't even know how to think about it. I was about to say, how could that not be, how could that not be frustrating? Right. I mean, and I get that it's not necessarily your experience, but the idea that somehow you just, a person has to, a person has to fight to even be seen. Never mind
yep.
be seen and then seen for what you are. Just to
And
be,
and I still have to fight to be seen, regardless of. I mean, I've done everything that I could possibly do to, in terms of education, to have seats at different tables. Um, but to this day, if I don't pull out the fact that I'm a doctor at certain events, people are just like, "Oh, she's just another educator." Like, somebody must have given her. Well, I've gotten when I tell people that I am still a teacher at my old high school, they're like, "Oh, well, that's nice.
oh, that's
They
nice.
gave
Yeah.
you a job at your old high school," and so I I I constantly am fighting against the, "Oh, you got the pity job,"
Right. Yeah.
and
And does that
and
come, does
that's
that
why you
come,
stay there for
so,
that.
sorry. Does that come also from colleagues? I don't mean people you work with at the school necessarily, but other people with physical or otherwise other disabilities or challenges. Do they do they assume that you got the pity job?
No, no,
No.
I wouldn't say it comes from people who are in the disability community, but it comes from other able-bodied folks all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Got it.
Um, because they assume that the only person or the only people that would give me a job, uh, while I was still getting my master's, uh, even though I was getting my master's in education and all of that, uh, the only people that would give me a teaching job to be in front of other children,
Yeah.
um, would be the people that
Yeah.
were high school teachers.
I I I I assume I don't I wish I didn't I wish I wasn't going to say this. I assume that a lot of people at the time felt that way when I hired you, when I offered you the job.
Yeah,
Uh, I
yeah.
I
I mean, I
assumed that there were
remember
people.
having concrete conversations with you about that too, and I was like, "Look, I don't want to be your pet. Like, I don't want to be here only because I'm an alumni of the
Yeah.
school. Like, I want to be valued for what I bring as a teacher.
Right.
And there's still days where it feels like sometimes parents, colleagues, anyone might think, oh, well, you're an alumni, how sweet. And I'm like, but I've also been here for 17 freaking years. Like, at some point, give me some credit.
Give
Like,
me some credit. Yeah. Well, give everybody some credit. It's like nobody's keeping you around as because you're like a mobile, right?
yeah.
Oh, isn't this interesting? Yeah. No. Right. Right. Well,
No,
yeah.
but
Although, I mean, I would say the risk that I felt in hiring you back then
yeah,
was just, you were a young teacher, and
yeah,
and I know you would be walking in the room not just as an inexperienced or relatively inexperienced teacher, but you have that other thing to overcome.
yeah, yeah,
And and as much as I thought, well, this is a pretty amazing community, it's like that was risky and not, you know, I knew that you had I mean, guys, I knew you. I knew that you were extraordinary, but I didn't know that it would be extraordinary enough, and that there's a lot of was as you know, right? I mean, there's a learning curve that only
yeah.
comes. You can't learn it all without being in the classroom, and then you're in the classroom, and it's like whoo, right? And
And let's be honest, teaching at Neuros is teaching a whole new, it's a whole other beast than teaching
yes,
at other schools
oh
for
yeah,
good reason.
yeah,
But it also made me know how I had to handle myself, and the professionalism with which I had to present from the very beginning,
yes,
not necessarily like how I looked, but I had to have my teaching in order from the very beginning,
yes,
because I knew that if not, parents were going to be like, what are you doing? Like,
right,
and they were automatically going to use the disability as a scapegoat,
right,
uh, regardless of whether it had anything to do with it or not.
sure,
They were going to say, well, this person doesn't know how to teach. And the reason is because she doesn't teach traditionally, and she doesn't write things on the board,
right,
and she doesn't do all this. But, and I remember having various conversations with various parents in the very beginning, saying, like, well, exactly, the speech conversation came into play. Like, your speech is a little slurred. And I'm like, but can you understand what I'm saying in English? Because if you can understand what I'm saying in English, I'm pretty sure your son can understand what I'm saying in Spanish. Um, so, so, but once people got to know me and got to know how serious I was about teaching, those conversations started to not happen as much.
yes, exactly,
And that's the unfortunate thing. Like, I feel like I'm never going to be able to get a chance just by applying to a position or a conference blindly. Like, somebody needs to know me before they actually give me a chance.
hmm
So the reason I was given a chance by you was, like you said, you knew me and you were willing to give me a chance.
right,
That happens in every single aspect of my life. If
right,
somebody knows me and knows that I'm capable, they understand that, well, she's got her shit together. She's gonna be able to do everything that we're asking her to do. But unfortunately, the sight unseen situation is never gonna work for me. Because the second they see me, they're gonna make that assumption of well, we didn't know that you were in a chair. Like,
Mm,
how does that work? And so I I never once have not disclosed my disability because of that. Like,
mhm.
because if the person is going to make an assumption right off the bat because I'm sitting in a chair, I'd rather not deal.
Are there specific assumptions that people make? Like, is there do they cluster? What
Yes.
are some of these assumptions that they make?
The the main assumption is that I'm just not intelligent,
Right,
because they associate the sitting in the chair with some sort of mental delay. They assume that the person sitting in the chair also has some sort of developmental delay. They assume that the person in the chair, just because they can't drive, doesn't have the ability to get places. Uh, so um, there's all sorts of
right,
societal assumptions,
right, right.
or
And
that I'm
well,
always
right,
going
and
to be dependent on other people, which sure I am to a certain extent, but it doesn't mean that I don't live my life independently.
yes, and nor does it. You know what it if anybody pays attention to that for more than a nanosecond, you know, oh, so that this person is dependent on other people. Really? Like, you mean there are people who aren't? You mean you go out and farm your own food? What are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? Right? Like, and lest anybody think otherwise. I had a lot of conversations when I was in the school. I had a lot of conversations with teachers about their grades being late. I never had to have that conversation with you, not once. It's always like, oh my god.
but but there's but also there's that I always made sure, and I always to this
Yeah,
day make sure that I conduct myself. This is, and you hear this conversation with so many different uh, groups of people who always feel like they have something else to prove. So for me, it's because of my disability, maybe also because I'm Latina, and all sorts of things. But there are people who will always say, like, I have to make sure that my stuff is spotless because if not, somebody's gonna judge me. And
right.
I live with that every day. Like I I can't drop the ball on anything
Okay, so how is that
because
not exhausting?
it is. It's exhausting. Um, but it's become so much of what I had to do
Mhm,
that
mhm,
that um that it's it, it it's not even um something that I have to necessarily think about anymore
sure.
because it just is.
Yeah,
But like even like for the last few years I've had to like take some time off for various medical procedures from work. Um and even when I'm technically on medical leave, like I'm constantly making sure that people understand that I'm not like taking a break from being a professional,
mhm,
like,
mhm,
and that goes back to my mental idea that if I don't prove to these people that I'm still part of it and that I'm still looking out for my students, my colleagues, whatever, uh, then I can be gone in the blink of an eye, and I don't want to be gone because
yeah,
if I'm gone, then it's going to be 10 times harder for me to find a job.
yeah, yeah. That's
because of everybody's assumptions.
Yeah, is there ever a way around that? Do you see it? Do you see it? I don't mean for you personally, but I mean, I guess that's the work of the disability community, right? I mean, disabled rights, et cetera. Is
Yeah,
that how does that how do you make a dent? I mean, you
I
do
mean,
make a dent in it, but with your competence, but boy, is that an uphill climb.
I see it every time I go into it because, like you said, I've now started a company with a colleague. So we go in and we have these conversations, and imagine what you can then start to do in building inclusive, like truly inclusive workplaces, and 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 all of that. So bringing disability to that conversation is part of what's going to eventually solve this
Mm,
idea of why is it so difficult to be a professional with a disability,
mhm.
um because of a lot of these assumptions that people make.
I have a question for you that the folks broke your pelvis or broke your femur, right? I mean, they like it had a real impact, a
Yeah.
real, and I use that word hesitantly. It had an obvious impact on your well-being
Yeah.
that was not based entirely in your feelings. You had feelings about it for sure,
Yeah.
but and I think a lot of times there's pushback on DEI stuff because often it feels like the only thing that people are speaking about or is their feelings. I feel I mean, I hear this from academics, I hear it
Yeah.
from people in the work world. It's like, what you know, I'm running a company. I'm not I'm not here for my employees' feelings. So
Right.
somebody like, okay, I made a mistake. Sorry. I called you the wrong pronoun or I said something that out of my own ignorance that you feel hurt by and yet the stuff that has happened to you. It just,
Right.
it feels more
No,
real. I don't know how to say this other than I don't know how to say it in a way that doesn't sound shitty, but it's like it feels more real.
but it is shitty. But what I think what the work is now is to say, if you if you are a company that is stating to the world that you are trying to be more inclusive, then how are you going to exclude one one category, for lack of a better word, that is so it's it it crosses all different types of of minority
Yes.
things. You can be a woman, you can be whatever it is. So what we are trying to say uh, is whether you think it's based on feelings or not, um, it's reality. And if you, as a company, are saying we are invested the in making it a more equitable work, if you are that person who doesn't give a damn and just rather focus in on your company's bottom line, then don't say it in your mission statement that you want to be an equitable work.
Well, but
So
wait. So Lim, can I push back here for a second?
yeah,
But but we'll include this is somebody I'm speaking for somebody else. We will include anybody who can help us get to our goal, which is making widgets. We
Right.
want to make certain kinds of widgets. We want quality control, but like, so whoever can do that. And if somebody is in a wheelchair who can do that, great. And if somebody is Black who can do that, great. And if somebody is, but but the fact that somebody is in some identity group, why should I have to pay attention to that? Because I'm not in the business of that. I'm in the business of widget making.
Right. Correct. But part of it is because it's the law. Like, there has to be some version, some uh, some realization from companies that there is some law that is driving the the placement of your workers in equitable conditions. So part of that is that going beyond the going beyond the law, it's now become what kind of image do you want to give to the outside world, and since now it's become part of this idea of making your places where people actually want to come and work and want to be seen, just like I was finally seen as a integral part of a community when I walked into New Roads. I think that's what workplaces are finally realizing. People are much more productive as employees when they feel seen and heard. And being seen and heard is part of the work of DEIAB. Is like, what does it mean to belong in a workforce? What does it mean to have diversity and equity in a workplace? It means having the tough conversations that a lot of companies don't know how to go about because of the same idea that we talked about in the first place. Is we've been told, and I put myself in this, we've been told that sometimes these topics are taboo because they're really uncomfortable. And but until we address them, there's nothing is going to come of it. And that's why uh myself and my colleague come in and facilitate some of the conversations around disability. But to go back to your point, I think the idea is really about, if you are more seen and heard, you become a more productive person. I was given the opportunity to show who I really was at New York.
Right. And it was ultimately your ability to teach students, to work with students effectively, that is most valuable in the school setting, right?
I was never denied that the opportunity to sit in the room and prove myself. Oftentimes, that opportunity is not even given because people are so scared of what that implies. If we hire someone with a disability, what does that imply? It means that we're going to have to spend thousands of dollars on equipment, and sure, there might be circumstances where that might happen, but there's also really simple things that you can do, and just awareness based, that you can do to make an environment more welcoming to someone with a disability. You did a lot of that without even knowing that that's what you were doing. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. I think one conversation at a time, you can realize you can change somebody's, or you can have a deeper conversation with certain people,
Totally.
and those are the conversations that you're left with, but not being but not wanting to bridge those conversations because you're scared of the outcome
Right.
is the worst thing you can do.
Totally. Well, Sophia, I am glad you were willing to have those conversations with me. And so thank you.
You're listening to Curiosity Invited with David Bryan here on LA Talk Radio.